Hi everyone. We're going to start Module 5 today. It's all about circles. Today's going to be kind of our introduction and vocabulary section, and then we're going to talk about circumference. So first of all, let's just make sure we know all of our most important vocabulary words when it comes to circles. The first word is center. Every circle has a center, and the center is a point. It's a point right smack in the middle of the center. By definition, we say the center is the one point that is equidistant or equal distance from every point on the circle. We also use the center to name our circles. So for example, right here, I would call this circle A. It's one of the easiest things to name. You only need one letter. You don't use 2 or 3 or 4 or anything like that. One letter names a circle, and you just want to use the point that is right smack in the middle. Okay, another important vocab word for circles is radius. Now, a radius is any line segment that connects the center, the point we just talked about, to the edge of the circle anywhere. I did put a note on here. I said plural. If you have more than one, we don't say radiuses, we say radii. And that's normal for a word that ends with S. A lot of times if you make if a word already ends with S and you make it plural, we don't say radiuses, we say radii. New vocab word, diameter. The diameter, it's kind of like the radius, but it keeps going. It connects one point on the circle to another, and it goes through the center. So here's a picture that has both a diameter and a radius showing. And I said, notice that both of them are line segments. If I ask you to name a diameter or a radius, it should be a line segment. It should be like AB or PQ or something like that. Okay, our last vocab word for today is chord. It's spelled C-H-O-R-D, so people who are in band or have studied music before are familiar with that word, chord. If you haven't studied music before, you might look at that word and think it says chord because it's a CH, but it's not. It's chord. And a chord is kind of like a diameter, but it doesn't have to go through the center. So you have a line segment that starts and ends on a circle. It connects 2 points from the circle, but it doesn't have to go through the center like a diameter does. And I said in this picture right here, line segment AB is a chord. So for our first example, let's take a new picture and just name parts, just to practice naming and to make sure we understand the vocab. So the first thing I asked you guys to name was the center of the circle. And remember, I said the center is just a point, so don't say AB or PQ or anything like that. The center is just the point, O. And that's it. The center of the circle is O. The name of the circle is also O. We would call this circle O. Okay, the second thing I asked you guys to name is a radius. Now there isn't only one answer to this, but it is a line segment. So the first thing I notice is OC or CO. It doesn't matter what order you put the letters in. So line segment OC is the first one that jumps out at me as a radius. However, remember, one thing we noticed is a diameter is actually 2 radii put together. So you could also say OA or OB. All 3 of those are radii in this picture that you're looking at. OC was the first one that I noticed because the diameter I'm going to use as the answer to the next one, but it's not wrong. Any 3 of those are a radius of the circle. And then the next one, which I just talked about, for the diameter is the one that goes all the way through the center from one side of the circle to the other. And in this picture, that would be line segment AB. Goes from point A to point B, goes right through point O. And then the last thing I asked you guys about is a chord. Now a chord's like a diameter, but it doesn't have to go through the center. So again, the first thing that jumps to my mind in this picture is that one up top, which would be line segment PQ. However, just like the second one, like the radius, there's more than one answer right here. You could have also said line segment AB, because a diameter is also a chord. A chord connects 2 points on the circle. It doesn't have to go through the center, but it can. So What I probably would have said for my answers would be the first thing I listed for each one. Center O, radius OC, diameter AB, chord PQ. However, for two of the choices there, or for two of the answers there, you had more than one choice. All right, our second topic for today is circumference. And the circumference of a circle is the distance around it. So here's a good way to think about it. Let's say your circle was made out of like wire or something, and you took a wire cutters and you clipped it and you straightened it out so it was a straight line instead of a circle, kind of like this picture here. So right here you got a circle, that little X on top is where we clipped it with a scissors or with a wire cutters, and it says A equals B. So basically like where we clipped it, we're making that's point A and B where they met. And then you can see they're kind of bending it, and straightening it out. If I measure in this picture the length of this line segment here, that's the circumference. I'll call it C for circumference. So circumference is a way of saying if a circle wasn't round, if it was straight, how long would it be? Or how, in a word problem, if there's a circle, a circular park, and you're riding your bike around it, how far around the park is it? That kind of question there. That's circumference, distance around a circle. Now, in order to calculate circumference, we need to know the number pi. So we have this number pi. It's a Greek letter. The symbol for pi, you can see it up there in top in purple right there. It's the two little bars with a squiggle over it. The spelling of that Greek letter is pi for pi, but I put in the note, it's pronounced pi, like pie that you eat or anything like that. So pi is a Greek letter. We want to know the symbol here. This is the symbol for pi right here. And it's a very, very common number in geometry, especially with circles. Now, it's what's called an irrational number, which means it's a decimal that just keeps going forever in a seemingly random pattern. There's no pattern to it. It never like repeats or stops or anything like that. It just keeps going forever and ever and ever, called an irrational number. So if I type pi into a calculator, my calculator told me 3.141592654, and that's where the calculator cut off. That's as far as the calculator showed me. So I just put ... It does keep going forever. I also said we usually round it off to 3.14, although pi doesn't equal 3.14. That's just like if you want to round off and say what it's about equal to. We say 3.14. What we are going to do is we have a pi button on our calculator. And if you have pi in a question, just use that button. If you round off, if you use 3.14 in the calculator, your answer will be off by a little bit because that's not exactly pi, that's an approximation. So from now on, if we're ever doing a circumference question or later on we're going to do area and you need to do a pi calculation in your calculator, don't type 3.14, that'll get you the wrong answer by a little bit. Instead, use that pi button. Okay, so here's why we had to know what pi is. We have two different formulas for circumference that are basically the same thing. We have C equals, and C stands for circumference, C equals either 2 pi r or pi d. Now, what r and d stand for is the radius and the diameter. And if you remember what we talked about earlier in the notes, remember the diameter is 2 radii together. So the diameter is always twice the radius. Well, if you look at this formula, they both have pi in it. In addition to the pi, this one has a 2 and an r, 2 times r. And this one has a d. Well, 2 times r is d. Whatever the radius, however long it is, 2 times that amount gives you the diameter because the diameter is 2 radii stuck together. So it's really the same formula. It just depends on what you're given. If you're given the radius, use 2 pi r. If you're given the diameter, just do pi d. So this is what I was saying. Basically the same equation since the diameter is twice the radius, or d equals 2r. So let's try some out. Start with a nice easy example. I said find the circumference of a circle with a radius of 10. Now I don't need a picture for this, but I'm going to draw one anyways for the notes, just for our first example. So here's my circle. Here's the center. here's the radius, and it's 10 units. I didn't even use units. 10 inches, 10 feet, maybe 10 miles in a word problem, whatever, it's 10. So I want to find the circumference. I want to figure out, again, maybe it's a word problem and that's 10 miles. If that radius is 10 miles, how far is it all the way around the circle? Well, what we have is two formulas. We have either circumference is 2 pi r, or circumference is 2 times the diameter. Now, in this question, I gave you the radius. That goes here. So just don't use this formula for this one. Just use the radius one. So for my answer, I'm going to have 2 pi times 10. And that would be, what you can do, there's two things you can do. Number one is you can just kind of treat pi almost like it's a variable and leave it there and multiply the other numbers. So 2 times 10 is 20. So this would be 20 pi. Now, once you get there, let's say we want an approximation. This is where you reach for your calculator and you do 20 pi on a calculator, or 20 times pi. And remember, don't do 3.14. Do 20 times and then use that pi button. I'm going to pause, grab a calculator, do that work, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got my answer. I'm going to go ahead and round it off a little bit. I'll call it 62.83. So there's the answer to your question. Again, pretend this is a word problem. You got this circle something with a 10-mile radius, and you have to go all the way around it. How far is it? Well, it's over 62 miles around that circle. If the radius is 10, the distance all the way around it is about 62.8. Okay, and for the next example, very similar. I said find the circumference of a circle with a diameter of 62. So this time I gave you the diameter. Now I'm going to do it without a picture. I don't need a picture this time. I drew it for one just to kind of show you what's happening. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, well, this time, because I gave you the diameter, let's not do 2 pi r. Let's do pi d. So I'm going to do circumference equals pi d, pi times the diameter. And then I'm just going to plug that 62 right in for d. So c equals pi times 62, which is 62 pi. And again, at this point, I'm just going to plug it into a calculator and get an approximation. So I will be right back. Okay, so I got my answer. We'll round it off again, 194.78. So again, make sure you're using the right one. This is a simple formula. Pi times the diameter or 2 pi times the radius. Very, very simple. Just make sure you use the right one. If you multiply by 2 for a diameter, the answer is going to be off. If you don't multiply by 2 for a radius, the answer will be off. Okay, so for our last example today, let me flip the question. Instead of first example, I gave you the radius, asked for the circumference. Second example, gave you the diameter, asked for the circumference. Third example, I'm going to give you the circumference and ask for both the diameter and the radius. So let's do them one at a time. Let's start with the diameter. I'll do this one first. Now, if I'm going to do diameter, I'm going to use the diameter formula, which would be c equals pi times d. Now, what I told you in this question is that the circumference is 20. So I'm going to take this 20, and I'm not going to plug it in for d. I'm going to plug it in for c, because it's the circumference. So what I get is the 20 goes over here, and then I have pi times d. Now, I asked it, what we're trying to find first is the diameter. So instead of just typing it into a calculator, I actually have one step to solve. If I want to find the diameter, I need to get rid of that pi in front of it, and I'm going to do that by dividing. So I'm going to divide both sides by pi, which will cancel that out. I've now solved for d. My answer is 20 divided by pi, or 20 over pi. And again, I'll just go to a calculator for that. So I will do the work one more time. And that one comes out to about 6.36. 20 divided by pi is about 6.36. Okay, now, for the other one, for part 2 of this question, I asked you to find the radius. Now, what I could do is start over, do c equals 2 pi r, work the question the same way, but there's an easier way to do it. If I already found the diameter, I already know the radius is exactly half the diameter. So to find the radius now, r, all I have to do is take my answer from before, 6.36, and divide it by 2. So the diameter is twice the radius, or the radius is half the diameter, depending on how you're thinking about it. So last answer for this question, the radius would be 3.18. So there's our answer, rounded off. We said the diameter, if the circumference is 20, the distance around a circle is 20, the diameter of that circle is about 6.36, and the radius is half that, so it's about 3.18.